we are still yet to achieve much in realizing these reforms. What has hindered this progress? What have been the challenges for government and its institutions to implement the necessary changes for the MACC? And how can civil society play a more active role in these reforms? These are some of the questions we hope to open up and discuss today.
Problems that arise when an agency that is specifically tasked with fighting corruption is not independent one, where instead it is placed under jurisdiction of the executive. This is an unattractive and may even be ineffective model to eradicate corruption, to say the least. The term conflict of interest appears in flashing lights when we consider the lack of independence when the MACC is conducting its investigations. From the standpoint of justice, it is crucial that the person who holds the role of public prosecutor must be able to make decisions independently of the executive as a whole. The separation of both the offices of the AG and the public prosecutor will ensure that they are truly impartial and independent from any political influence.
To put it as a constitutional commission would be the first step to ensure a more independent MACC, and this is what we were actually advocating. The current appointment process of the Chief Commissioner and the commissioners in MACC cannot continue the way it is. It has to have a more transparent, accountable process that might even need to include, say, for example, advertisements in the newspapers, so that many qualified persons who are very well resourced on anti-corruption work would be able to apply, and it would then be decided on merit.
Every year, Transparency International publishes the Corruption Perception Index. Although it's called CPI, Corruption Perception Index, but the measures in the CPI is very wide. It looks at freedom of information, it looks at the commitment of the government for reforms, institutional reforms, and so on. Now, how do you expect our ranking and our score to go up if you don't want to reform?
Urge our young progressive MPs to get involved and do whatever you can to get the word out to your party leaders about how important this is, because a corrupt system does not benefit anyone.
The corruption in Malaysia today is so embedded. It's almost a curse. It cuts across all stratas of society. Not just in the public sector, mind you, it's also in the private sector. Because, like they say, these two to tango, and if there's no giver, there won't be a taker. Separation of the judicial and legal service. So that you have the Chief Justice in charge of the judiciary, the senior judiciary, and the Chief Registrar in charge of the lower judiciary, magistrates court and the sessions court. And then you will have the public prosecutor in charge of the prosecution, right? And this person must be very independent, and it cannot be rolled together with the role of the Attorney General, because as we know, the Attorney General is the chief advisor. He advises the government on the law, no doubt. He also advises on policy, and whatever way forward. So if we can have these three branches kept very separate, judicial service, the prosecutorial service, and the Attorney General's service.
But we do not go to the seat because we're afraid. We're so afraid to be caught and arrested. I think we must change the mindset of the people. The people will shake the government. And I'm for this.
We are looking at a thorough amendment to it. Areas in terms of the oversight body, for example, a body just look at the implementation of the whistleblowers protection, because currently the situation is the enforcement agency will receive the complaint, they will then give protection, and they will also investigate, which is an additional burden to the existing workload for the enforcement agency. So we're looking at that as one area. The other thing is internal reporting. You may have companies who can actually accept internal reporting from the employees, for example, in terms of whistleblower. protection, and then of course come back to the enforcement agency for protection. Many of these foundations have issues with governance issues. In fact, under BIO itself, we have several foundations that are being investigated by the MACC itself. Under us, we have currently about 500 odd trusts. Out of this 500 odd trusts, we have about half of it call themselves as yayasan or foundations, and many of them are actually government funded. So the question is, what happens to the funds? How are the funds managed?
As our level of corruption is today, I would say equal to that of the best, which is Brazil and Indonesia. I think it will be useful for us to spend some time learning from these countries.
With sort of unexpected wealth, it is absent in our MACC. So that, I think, is a very important point to incorporate.
At the end of the day, it's always a question of the enforcement, the investigation and the endorsements that comes with it. And that's why this actually underscores the very important need to have a separate prosecutor for MACC, a separate power given to MACC for prosecutions.
One of the main principles here is that the anti-corruption heads shall be appointed through a process that ensure their political stance, impartiality, neutrality, integrity, and competence. The tenure, of course, defined very specifically by the law, as well as the circumstances whereby this tenure can be interrupted. So the removal or dismissal of the head has to be, very specifically established by law. There must be this system of check and balances, and no agencies can operate in absolute independence. That's quite clear. So, there cannot be that much independence without a proper security of financial allocation. So the best practice here would be to have a budget allocated on the basis of the law annually by the parliament. Anti-corruption agencies cannot operate alone. And one of the most important pillars of the fight against corruption is actually the police. 90% of the time, the problems are in the system. They are systemic. And many anti-corruption practitioners make the mistake of thinking that by reforming just one institution, and by looking at one institution, you can really make a difference in the fight against corruption.